In-person absentee voting began in Wisconsin Tuesday. Milwaukee has 14 early voting sites. Voters in the city can cast ballots at any of those locations, no matter their district. States have had the past 7 months to prepare for voting during a pandemic. Wisconsin held spring elections back in April, early on in the pandemic. In a new Frontline documentary, historian and journalist Jelani Cobb investigated whose vote counts and whose might not. He revisited that election.
Long lines as folks wait for their polling place. You can see
they've made it so difficult for people to vote here, just asking too much of people to come out with this virus going on.
It was a major election in the middle of a pandemic.
There's been confusion around what actually is allowed.
It was difficult to request an absentee ballot.
I didn't even know how to do it.
I didn't know about that option to vote through the absentee voting.
Mail ballots, they cheat, okay? People cheat. Mail ballots are fraudulent in many cases.
Absentee ballots delayed in the mail.
I requested an absentee ballot,
but didn't come in time.
That never came.
So I was forced to go and vote
at one of the 5 polling stations.
Voters forced to choose between their health and their civic duty.
Those lines are long in Wisconsin, despite the state's safer-at-home order.
It is unethical.
It was such a putrid decision.
People are going to die because of this.
Claims of voter suppression.
Any ballots received after April 13th will be rejected. 750 ballots so far have been rejected.
I'm really frustrated because my vote won't count.
It was the most blatant form of voter suppression.
Was this all a view of things to come?
I just can't imagine that somebody would do that in this country.
In the impending presidential election.
Jelani Cobb joins me now. The Frontline film Whose Vote Counts is made in collaboration with Columbia Journalism Investigations and USA Today. Jelani, thank you so much for joining us. You know, we all remember those images back in April. There was so much that was unknown about the pandemic and how deadly this virus was. Why did you choose to focus on Wisconsin besides that chaotic primary back in April?
Sure. Well, thank you for having me on. And we started this before the pandemic. You know, we were looking at the issue of voter access and voter suppression and thinking from the beginning that it was going to play a role in this election. And we wanted to pick a state that was not in the Deep South. You know, there was a story that's been told or that people know or think that they know and connected to 1965 and Selma and Dr. King and John Lewis. But we were trying to highlight the fact that voter suppression is now a national concern, that it happens in places where you might not expect or predict it to happen. And Wisconsin was really one of the best examples of it because there were so many things that had happened there. The extreme gerrymandering of districts, the very strict voter ID law that made it more difficult for people to cast ballots. At the same time that the law was more stringent, the number of DMV offices in the state was reduced. And it became fairly clear that these were attempts to really curate the electorate in particular ways that would be beneficial to the Republican majority in the state house there.
Well, there were a lot of issues with absentee ballots in that election. Some people didn't even get their ballots on time. Now, the president has said that mail ballot fraud is a threat to the upcoming election, but you looked into the history of absentee balloting and the language around voter fraud. Let's go ahead and play a clip of that.
When you don't want somebody to vote, you create various kinds of things. Now we'd come with the 1965 Voting Rights Act. They couldn't deny it outright, so you find ways to try to suppress it.
One of these ways would be through challenging black voters' absentee ballots, through accusations of fraud.
It's one thing to be attacked by the local power structure.
Hank Sanders represented the defendants in one such case, brought by the U.S. Attorney in Alabama at the time, Jeff Sessions.
The U.S. Attorney and others refer to these as the voter fraud cases. We decided that they were voter persecution cases.
So, Jelani, what happened in that case?
Well, that case centered around two people, Albert and Evelyn Turner, who had helped people register to vote and helped them vote via absentee ballots. and they've been brought, I think like 29 charges were brought against them by Jeff Sessions, and they were acquitted on all of those charges. But the point was to create a chilling effect, to make people concerned or fearful. And this is one of the early places where we begin to see the rhetoric of voter fraud being used as a hedge against the kind of empowerment the Voting Rights Act of 1965 had created, and has only grown since then, particularly in the aftermath of the 2008 election, where Barack Obama, the first African American, was elected to the presidency of the United States. And so all those dynamics have kind of moved exponentially, and we see them emerging once again in this election.
And to be clear, Jelani, is there any evidence of widespread systemic voter fraud in this country?
There is not. When we interviewed people on the right and we gave them the opportunity to provide this kind of evidence, they gave us information, and then when our investigative team started digging into it, we found that these information they were giving us was misleading. And so there just simply is not. And there are some Republicans who have admitted this in the film, you'll see, that there simply is not any reason to believe that there's widespread voter fraud that happens in the United States.
Well, in the final weeks of this election, what in particular will you be looking for when it comes to mail-in ballots?
Certainly, we are concerned about the disparate rejection rates that we've seen. 23,000 absentee ballots were rejected in that primary in Wisconsin. And so we're worried that this may be a harbinger of what we see in other places. Disproportionate numbers of people of color in low-income communities saw their ballots being rejected. And that's not anything that we want to see repeated on November 3rd. So we'll be keeping an eye out for that.
And Jelani, do people you spoke to in Wisconsin feel better about the general election than they did about the one in April?
Well, I think that there's a lot of trepidation. People are very concerned. And there's a lot of on-the-ground activism and people who are very motivated to get out there and have their voice heard. But it would be wrong to say that there wasn't a lot of consternation and worry about whether or not something will go awry or something unfair will happen in the course of the election.
All right, well, Whose Vote Counts premieres Tuesday night on PBS and online. Jelani Cobb, Jelani, thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.